When my best friend asked to talk privately at my wedding, she said, "I'm pregnant with your fiancé's baby. We've been together for months." I stood in the bride's preparation room at Riverside Estate, my wedding dress already on, makeup perfect, hair swept into an elaborate updo that had taken 2 hours to complete. The ceremony was supposed to start in 20 minutes. 200 guests were seated outside in the garden, string quartet playing softly, my parents greeting relatives I hadn't seen in years. Vanessa stood in front of me in her maid of honor dress, pale blue silk that we'd chosen together 6 months ago, her hands trembling slightly as she held a small white envelope. I'm Claire Donovan, and 30 seconds ago I'd been the happiest version of myself, about to marry Ethan Lawrence, the man I'd loved for 4 years. Now Vanessa's words hung in the air between us like poison gas, and I couldn't make sense of what she just said. My brain kept trying to reinterpret the syllables into something that made sense, something that wasn't the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my life. "I'm sorry, what?" The words came out flat, emotionless, because my mind hadn't processed the meaning yet. Vanessa's eyes were red, like she'd been crying, but her expression held something I'd never seen before. Not quite guilt, not quite triumph. Something darker, more complex, that made my stomach turn even before I understood why. She opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph, an ultrasound image with a date stamp from 3 weeks ago. "I'm 11 weeks pregnant. It's Ethan's. We've been sleeping together since January. I wanted to tell you before, but he kept saying he'd handle it, that he'd find the right time to break things off with you. Then you set the wedding date and everything spiraled. I can't let you marry him without knowing the truth." The photograph showed the grainy black and white image of a fetus, measurements and medical terminology I didn't understand printed along the margins. My hands reached for it automatically, even as my brain screamed that this couldn't be real, couldn't be happening, not now, not 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. January. That was 8 months ago. We'd been engaged since December, started wedding planning in earnest by February. Vanessa had been there for all of it, helping me choose the venue, taste testing cakes, addressing invitations at my kitchen table while we drank wine and laughed about married life. She'd thrown my bachelorette party 3 weeks ago, a weekend trip to Napa where she'd given a toast about true love and finding your person. All of it while sleeping with my fiancé, while carrying his child. The room tilted slightly, my vision narrowing at the edges. I sat down hard on the velvet bench near the mirror, the dresses train pooling around me in expensive white fabric that suddenly felt like a costume. "How long?" I heard myself ask. Vanessa looked at the floor. "We connected at the New Year's Eve party. You remember, you weren't feeling well and went home early. Ethan stayed to help me clean up after everyone left. It just happened. We both regretted it immediately, tried to stop, but we kept finding reasons to see each other. Study sessions, coffee meetups. That weekend you visited your sister and I needed help with my car. Eventually we stopped pretending it was accidental." The cruelty of that last sentence cut through my shock. This wasn't guilt. This was something else. Vanessa had always been competitive, even when we were kids growing up in the same neighborhood, attending the same schools, comparing grades and boyfriends and college acceptances. But I'd thought we'd grown past that. I'd thought our friendship, 23 years of shared history, was deeper than competition. I'd been wrong. The door to the preparation room opened and my sister Jenna walked in wearing her bridesmaid dress, smiling until she saw my expression. "Claire, what's wrong? Why are you sitting down? We need to start lining up." I looked at Vanessa, then at my sister, then at the ultrasound image still clutched in my hand. "I need to talk to Ethan. Right now." Jenna's smile vanished. She looked between me and Vanessa, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. "What's going on?" I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me, the dress's weight suddenly oppressive. "Jenna, I need you to find Ethan and bring him here. Don't tell anyone why. Just get him here immediately." Jenna must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue, just turned and left quickly. Vanessa watched me, her expression now carefully neutral. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer. I was thinking through logistics with the strange clarity that sometimes emerges during crisis. 200 guests. A venue we'd paid $15,000 to reserve. Catering for the reception already prepared. A photographer, a videographer, a string quartet, a DJ for the reception, flowers everywhere, hotel rooms booked for out-of-town relatives. My parents, who'd contributed significantly to the wedding budget despite their retirement income. My father, who was probably putting on his boutonniere right now, preparing to walk me down the aisle. The officiant, who'd met with us 3 times to personalize the ceremony. All of it about to collapse because the woman standing in front of me had decided 8 months of sleeping with my fiancé wasn't enough. She needed to destroy the wedding too. Maybe she needed to see if Ethan would choose her if forced to decide. Maybe this was her twisted way of claiming victory in whatever competition existed only in her mind. Ethan arrived 5 minutes later, looking confused and slightly annoyed. Jenna had clearly pulled him away from something. He was in his tuxedo, looking exactly like the man I'd fallen in love with, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and the easy smile that had first attracted me. That smile died when he saw Vanessa and me, when he registered my expression and the ultrasound image I was holding. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. "Claire, I can explain." Those 4 words confirmed everything. If he'd been innocent, he would have asked what was wrong, shown confusion, defended himself. Instead, he'd seen Vanessa and the ultrasound and immediately known his secret was exposed. The explanation he offered to provide was an admission in itself. I felt something break inside me, something that had been intact just 10 minutes ago when I'd been checking my makeup one final time. Is it true? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. Are you the father of her baby? Ethan looked at Vanessa with an expression that might have been betrayal, like she'd violated some agreement between them. Then he looked back at me and nodded once, sharply. Yes. The single word hung in the air. Yes. Not an explanation, not a justification, just confirmation that my best friend and my fiancé had been having an affair for 8 months while I planned our wedding. Jenna made a sound, something between a gasp and a cry of outrage. She'd been standing by the door and clearly hadn't known what was happening until this moment. You bastard, she breathed. How could you? How could both of you? Vanessa spoke up, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Jenna, this isn't how we wanted this to come out. We never meant to hurt Claire. It just happened, and then it kept happening, and now there's a baby to consider. Ethan has responsibilities. Jenna turned on her with fury I'd rarely seen from my usually calm sister. You're her best friend. You've been her friend since elementary school, and you've been sleeping with her fiancé while helping her plan a wedding to him? That's not something that just happens. That's deliberate cruelty. I watched this exchange like I was watching a movie, emotionally disconnected from the scene. Some part of my brain had shut down to protect me from the full impact. I knew that eventually the shock would wear off and the real pain would hit, but right now I felt almost nothing. Just cold, just numb, just calculating what needed to happen next. There were 200 people outside waiting for a wedding. My parents had already walked down the aisle to their seats. The groomsmen and bridesmaids were lined up, ready to process. The officiant was in position. In about 5 minutes, someone would come looking for us to ask why we weren't starting. I had maybe 3 minutes to make a decision that would affect the rest of my life and publicly humiliate multiple people, including myself. I could cancel the wedding, send everyone home, eat the costs, and deal with the aftermath privately. Or I could go through with the ceremony and confront this later, buying time to think. Or I could do something else entirely, something that the cold, calculating part of my brain was already formulating. I looked at Ethan, really studied his face. How much of our relationship had been real? How much had been performance while he counted down the hours until he could be with Vanessa? When he'd told me he loved me, proposed to me, made plans for our future, had any of it been genuine? Or had I just been the safe choice, the acceptable fiancé, while Vanessa was the one who actually excited him? Do you love her? I asked. Ethan's face contorted. Claire, this isn't the time. We need to figure out what to do about the ceremony. People are waiting. I repeated the question, my voice harder. Do you love her? Or is she just someone you've been sleeping with while keeping me as your backup plan? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw the truth. He didn't know. Or maybe he did know, and couldn't decide which answer would cause less damage. Vanessa watched him, waiting for his response with an intensity that revealed she'd been asking herself the same question. This pregnancy, this revelation, this destruction of my wedding, was her way of forcing him to choose. She was making him declare himself publicly, with stakes high enough that he couldn't deflect or delay. Ethan finally spoke, his voice careful. I care about both of you. This situation is complicated. There's a child involved now, and that changes everything. I need time to figure out what's right. Vanessa's expression shifted to something like pain. That wasn't the answer she'd wanted. She'd expected him to choose her, or at least acknowledge the affair as more than convenience. Instead, he was still hedging, still trying to keep both options open. A knock on the door interrupted us. My mother's voice came through, concerned. Claire, honey, is everything okay? You're supposed to be lining up. I made a decision. Not the decision anyone expected, but the only one that made sense to the cold, furious part of me that had taken control. I'm coming, Mom. Give me 2 more minutes. I turned to Jenna. Go tell the officiant we're having a small delay, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Tell him to have the quartet play another song. Don't let anyone panic. Jenna looked at me like I was insane. Claire, you can't seriously be thinking of going through with this. I'm not, I said quietly. But I'm not canceling either. Just give me 5 minutes to handle this. Jenna left reluctantly, shooting Ethan and Vanessa looks of pure hatred. When the door closed, I turned back to them. Here's what's going to happen. You're both going to go out there and take your positions like nothing is wrong. Vanessa, you're my maid of honor. You're going to walk down that aisle. Ethan, you're going to stand at the altar and wait for me. And then, in front of 200 people, I'm going to explain exactly why this wedding isn't happening and exactly what you've both done. Vanessa's eyes widened. Claire, you can't. That will humiliate everyone. Exactly, I said. You wanted the truth to come out. You wanted to force a confrontation. So let's confront it publicly. Let's make sure everyone who knows us, every friend, every family member, every colleague, understands what happened. Let's make sure your parents and Ethan's parents and my parents all hear the full story. Let's make sure your names are permanently associated with this betrayal. Ethan stepped forward, his voice urgent. Claire, please. Think about what you're doing. This will destroy all of us. You'll regret making it public. I met his eyes with cold fury. I already regret trusting you. I already regret believing Vanessa was my friend. I already regret the 4 years I wasted building a life with someone who was sleeping with my best friend. What I won't regret is making sure everyone knows the truth. You both wanted this confrontation. Now you get to experience it on my terms, not yours. Vanessa tried a different approach, her voice pleading. Claire, I know I hurt you. I know this is awful. But I told you because I care about you, because I couldn't let you marry him without knowing. Don't punish me for trying to do the right thing. The audacity of framing her confession as altruism was breathtaking. I almost laughed. You told me 20 minutes before the ceremony because you wanted maximum impact. You wanted to force Ethan to choose you. You wanted to ruin this wedding because you can't stand the thought of me having something you don't. This has nothing to do with protecting me and everything to do with your own agenda. Now get out there and take your place, both of you, or I'll drag you out there myself. They looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then Ethan spoke, his voice resigned. If we do this, if we go out there, you promise you'll explain what happened? You won't just leave everyone confused? I'll explain everything, I confirmed. In detail, every bit of the 8-month affair, the pregnancy, the lies, all of it. Ethan nodded slowly, like a man accepting his execution. Fine, let's get this over with. They left the preparation room, Vanessa moving toward the bridesmaids lineup and Ethan heading to the altar. I stood alone, looking at myself in the mirror. My dress was perfect. My makeup was perfect. My hair was perfect. I looked exactly like a bride should look. Except I wasn't going to be a bride. I was going to be something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and opened my recording app, making sure it was set to high-quality audio. Then I tucked the phone into the hidden pocket sewn into my dress, positioned so it would capture everything. If I was going to do this, I wanted documentation. Then I picked up my bouquet, white roses and peonies that had cost $400, took a deep breath, and walked out to destroy my wedding and their lives. The ceremony space was beautiful. We'd chosen Riverside Estate for its gardens, the way late afternoon sunlight filtered through the old oak trees, the elegant stone archway where couples exchanged vows. 200 chairs were arranged in neat rows, filled with everyone who mattered to us. My family on the left, Ethan's on the right, friends and colleagues scattered throughout. They all stood as I appeared, smiling, some dabbing at their eyes with tissues because weddings made people emotional. My father waited at the end of the aisle, beaming with pride, ready to walk me to my future. I took his arm and let him lead me forward while the string quartet played the processional we'd chosen together, Pachelbel's Canon in D, traditional but beautiful. Everyone was looking at me with joy and anticipation. They had no idea what was about to happen. As we walked, I saw Vanessa standing at the altar in her maid of honor position, her face pale but composed. I saw Ethan waiting at the center, his expression carefully neutral, probably wondering if I was actually going to go through with my threat. I saw the officiant, Reverend Montgomery, an older man who'd known my family for years, smiling warmly. I saw my mother in the front row, crying happy tears. I saw Ethan's parents, looking proud of their son. I saw my college roommate, my work colleagues, my cousins, all the people who'd been part of my life and would now witness its implosion. My father kissed my cheek when we reached the altar and whispered, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Then he took his seat next to my mother, and I stood facing Ethan with Reverend Montgomery between us. The Reverend began the ceremony with the traditional opening. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Claire Donovan and Ethan Lawrence in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, built on trust, love, and mutual respect. Let us begin the celebration of their commitment to one another. I let him get through about 2 more sentences before I held up my hand. Reverend Montgomery, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something I need to say before we go any further. He looked confused but nodded. Of course, Claire. Whatever you need. I turned to face the guests, all 200 of them looking at me with expressions ranging from curious to concerned. My mother had half risen from her seat, sensing something wrong. I took a breath and began. I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know many of you traveled long distances to be here. I know you've given up your Saturday, dressed up, brought gifts, and come to support what you thought would be a joyful occasion. I appreciate that more than I can say. However, there isn't going to be a wedding today. The reason there isn't going to be a wedding is because about 30 minutes ago, my maid of honor and best friend, Vanessa, told me she's 11 weeks pregnant with my fiancé's baby. They've been having an affair since January, for the past 8 months, while I planned this wedding and prepared to commit my life to a man who was sleeping with someone I trusted like a sister. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 people frozen in place, trying to process what they'd just heard. Then the silence broke. My mother made a sound like she'd been punched. My father stood up, his face dark with rage. Ethan's mother gasped audibly. People started murmuring, turning to their neighbors, looking between me, Ethan, and Vanessa with shock and horror. I continued speaking, my voice cutting through the noise. I have proof, if anyone doubts me. I held up the ultrasound image that I'd tucked into my bouquet. This is the ultrasound from 3 weeks ago showing an 11-week pregnancy. Vanessa brought it to me in the preparation room. Ethan has confirmed he's the father. They both admitted the affair started on New Year's Eve, when I went home sick and left Ethan to help her clean up. It continued for 8 months. During that time, Vanessa helped me choose this venue, pick out bridesmaid dresses, plan my bachelorette party, and pretend to be excited about my marriage to a man she was sleeping with behind my back. Vanessa was crying now, mascara running down her face. People were staring at her with disgust. Her parents, seated on the bride's side about halfway back, looked devastated. Ethan tried to speak. "Claire, this isn't the way to handle this. We should talk privately." I turned on him. "We did talk privately. You admitted everything. You confirmed you're the father of her baby. You admitted to an 8-month affair with my best friend while we were engaged and planning our wedding. What more is there to discuss?" He had no answer. My father had moved from his seat and was walking toward Ethan with purpose. My uncle grabbed his arm, holding him back, but I could see my father wanted to physically hurt him. My mother was openly sobbing, not tears of joy, but tears of heartbreak and rage. Jenna had moved to stand beside me, her arm around my waist in support. I addressed the guests again. "I'm canceling this wedding. Obviously. I won't be marrying someone who's been betraying me for the majority of our engagement. The reception is also canceled, though I understand catering has already prepared the food. Anyone who wants to stay and eat is welcome to do so, since it's already paid for. Consider it a party celebrating the fact that I discovered the truth before legally tying myself to someone who doesn't respect me or our relationship. As for Ethan and Vanessa, I hope they're very happy together. They've certainly worked hard enough to be together, lying and sneaking around for months, risking everything for their affair. Now they get to experience the consequences." Reverend Montgomery looked completely out of his depth. "Claire, perhaps we should all take a moment to calm down and discuss this privately. There's no need for public recrimination." I shook my head. "Reverend, respectfully, there's every need for public recrimination. These two people didn't just betray me privately. They betrayed me while accepting invitations to this wedding, while participating in wedding planning, while letting me and everyone else believe in a relationship that was fundamentally dishonest. Everyone here deserves to know the truth. They deserve to know that the wedding they came to witness is canceled because the groom was sleeping with the maid of honor." Vanessa finally found her voice, speaking through tears. "Claire, I never meant for it to happen like this. I tried to tell you privately, to give you a chance to process before the wedding. I know that sounds hollow now, but I did try to do the right thing." I turned to her, and whatever she saw in my expression made her take a step back. "You didn't do the right thing, Vanessa. The right thing would have been not sleeping with my fiancé. The right thing would have been ending the affair after the first time, if it was really just a mistake. The right thing would have been telling me months ago, before I invested thousands of dollars and countless hours into a wedding that would never happen. You didn't tell me to protect me. You told me to force Ethan's hand, to make him choose between us. This was about your agenda, not my well-being." Vanessa's father had stood up, his face a mask of shame and anger. "Vanessa Lynn, we're leaving. Now." Vanessa looked at him, then at Ethan, clearly hoping he'd defend her or claim her or do something to validate the sacrifice she'd made by confessing. Ethan stood frozen, not moving toward her, not speaking in her defense. She'd destroyed my wedding thinking it would free him to be with her. Instead, he was standing there looking trapped and miserable, probably calculating how much this public exposure would cost him professionally and socially. Vanessa's mother had joined her father, both of them moving toward their daughter. They took her arms and guided her down the aisle, past rows of guests who stared with a mixture of judgment and pity. Vanessa was still crying, looking back at Ethan one last time before her parents led her out of the garden. She'd wanted him to choose her. He'd chosen neither of us, just himself, as he'd probably been doing all along. Ethan's father approached the altar, his expression hard. "Son, I think you need to leave as well." Ethan nodded, not even trying to defend himself or apologize further. He walked down the aisle in the opposite direction, leaving through a side exit. The groomsmen followed him uncertainly, the whole wedding party dissolving into chaos. I stood at the altar in my wedding dress, bouquet still in hand, watching my almost husband and my former best friend retreat in opposite directions. My parents reached me, my mother pulling me into a tight embrace. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." My father's hand rested on my shoulder, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "You did the right thing, Claire, exposing them publicly, making sure everyone knows the truth. I'm proud of you for being strong enough to stand up there and tell everyone what they did." Jenna was crying now too, angry tears. "I can't believe them. I can't believe they did this to you. I'm going to kill them both." I felt strangely calm, the shock still insulating me from the full emotional impact. "I know this looks dramatic," I said to my parents, "but I couldn't let them get away with this quietly. I couldn't let Vanessa frame her confession as some kind of noble truth-telling when really she was just forcing a confrontation. And I couldn't let Ethan walk away without everyone knowing what he'd done." The guests were starting to disperse, some leaving immediately, others gathering in small groups to discuss what they'd just witnessed. I could hear fragments of conversation. "Can you believe it? 8 months, with her best friend, and she's pregnant. That poor girl having to find out on her wedding day." The photographer approached tentatively. "Miss Donovan, do you want me to pack up or—" I thought about it. Actually, can you take some photos? Not wedding photos, obviously. But I want documentation of this moment. I want to remember what I looked like when I chose myself over a man who didn't value me. The photographer looked uncertain but nodded. Of course. She spent the next 20 minutes taking photos of me in my wedding dress, standing alone at the altar where I was supposed to have gotten married. Some photos were composed and calm. Others captured the devastation starting to show through my shock. All of them would remind me of the day I discovered my fiancé's betrayal and chose to expose it rather than suffer in silence. My mother's sister, Aunt Diane, approached with practical concerns. Claire, what do you want to do about the reception venue? The catering? The DJ? I shrugged. I meant what I said. Anyone who wants to stay and eat is welcome to. We've paid for everything. Might as well let people enjoy the food and drinks. Consider it a celebration of dodging a bullet. Aunt Diane nodded approvingly. That's a healthy way to look at it. I'll spread the word. About half the guests chose to stay for what became the strangest reception in history. A wedding reception with no wedding, no bride and groom, just shocked guests eating expensive food and discussing the scandal they just witnessed. I changed out of my wedding dress into a simple blue dress I'd packed for the send-off, unable to bear wearing the white gown any longer. Then I joined the reception, moving through the crowd, accepting condolences and words of support. People I barely knew approached to tell me how brave I was, how strong, how much they admired my handling of an impossible situation. It felt surreal, being congratulated for publicly exposing my own humiliation. But there was something cathartic about it too. Everyone knew the truth now. There would be no whispers about what really happened, no rumors or speculation, just the plain fact that Ethan and Vanessa had betrayed me, and I'd refused to protect them from the consequences. My college roommate Lindsay found me near the bar. I always knew Ethan was too smooth, too perfect. Men who seem that perfect are usually hiding something. I wish I'd said something sooner. I squeezed her hand. It's not your fault. I didn't see it either. I trusted both of them completely. That's what makes this so devastating. Not just the betrayal, but the realization that I was blind to something everyone else apparently suspected. Lindsay shook her head. None of us really suspected. We just had vague feelings. You can't end a relationship based on vague feelings. You needed concrete evidence, and you got it in the worst possible way. The reception wound down after a few hours. Guests left in small groups, most stopping to hug me or offer support before they departed. My parents stayed until the end, helping coordinate cleanup and dealing with vendors. When everything was finally done and the venue was empty except for family, my mother sat beside me on a bench overlooking the garden where I should have gotten married. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I considered the question. I feel numb, like this happened to someone else and I'm just watching from outside my own body. I know eventually I'm going to fall apart, but right now I just feel empty. My mother pulled me against her shoulder, the way she had when I was a child. That's shock. It's protecting you from the full impact. When it wears off, you're going to feel everything. Anger, grief, betrayal, humiliation. It's going to be awful. But you're strong, Claire. You'll get through this. And someday, you'll find someone who actually deserves you. Someone who would never dream of betraying you like this. I wanted to believe her, but in that moment, I couldn't imagine trusting anyone again. How could I, when the two people I'd trusted most had been lying to me for months? When my best friend since childhood and the man I'd planned to marry had conspired to deceive me while I naively planned our future? The next few days were a blur of practical necessities. Canceling the honeymoon reservations, returning wedding gifts with apologetic notes explaining why the wedding hadn't happened, dealing with vendors who'd already been paid and couldn't offer refunds, fielding calls from relatives who wanted to express their support or outrage. Social media was the worst. Someone had posted about the wedding scandal, and it had spread through our social circle like wildfire. I received dozens of messages, some supportive, others clearly fishing for gossip. I ignored most of them, unable to cope with the attention. Ethan tried to contact me multiple times, calling and texting and finally showing up at my apartment 3 days after the canceled wedding. I almost didn't let him in, but some part of me needed closure, needed to understand how he could have done this. We sat in my living room, the same space where we'd addressed wedding invitations just months before, and I waited for him to speak. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept since the wedding. Claire, I know I can't undo what I did. I know I destroyed your trust and humiliated you publicly. I just need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen. It wasn't planned, it wasn't deliberate, it was just, it happened, and then it kept happening, and I didn't know how to stop it without losing everything. I stared at him, amazed by his capacity for self-deception. You didn't know how to stop sleeping with my best friend? It's actually very simple. You stop. You tell her it was a mistake and it can't continue. You tell me the truth and face the consequences. What you don't do is continue the affair for 8 months while pretending everything is fine. Ethan ran his hands through his hair, frustrated. You're right. I know you're right. I was a coward. I wanted to have both of you because I couldn't decide which relationship I valued more. Vanessa was exciting and unpredictable. You were stable and planned. I thought I could keep both until I figured out what I really wanted. That admission was somehow worse than anything else. He'd been treating me like an option, a backup plan, while he explored whether Vanessa was worth the risk. "Do you love her?" I asked again. Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know. I thought I might, but now that everything's exposed, I realize I just loved the thrill of having a secret. The sneaking around, the forbidden aspect. Now that it's public, it's not exciting anymore. It's just messy and complicated. So you destroyed our relationship and ruined her life for a thrill? For excitement?" Ethan had no answer that would make his behavior understandable or forgivable. I told him to leave and never contact me again. He left looking defeated, and I felt nothing watching him go. The man I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize and couldn't respect. The shock was starting to wear off, just as my mother had predicted, and beneath it was an ocean of pain I wasn't ready to face. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Lorraine Blackwood, who specialized in betrayal trauma and relationship recovery. She'd been practicing for 19 years and came highly recommended by my doctor. Our first session, I told her everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the wedding day revelation, the public exposure. Dr. Blackwood listened without judgment, taking occasional notes. When I finished, she looked at me with professional compassion. "Claire, what you experienced was multiple layers of betrayal simultaneously. Your romantic partner, your best friend, and the future you'd imagined all revealed to be false on what should have been one of the happiest days of your life. That's traumatic in ways most people can't comprehend. You're going to need time to process all of this, and it's going to affect your ability to trust for a while. That's normal and healthy. Your trust was violated profoundly. Rebuilding it will take time and conscious effort." We talked about trust, about how it's built on consistent behavior over time, and how a single betrayal can demolish years of accumulated trust instantly. We talked about my decision to expose Ethan and Vanessa publicly, whether it was healthy or driven by revenge. Dr. Blackwood surprised me by saying it was probably both, and that was okay. You had a right to tell your truth. You had a right to protect yourself from the narrative they might have created. And you had a right to ensure they face social consequences for their actions. Revenge doesn't have to be unhealthy if it's proportionate and doesn't consume you. What you did was proportionate. They hurt you publicly by planning a wedding with you while conducting an affair. You responded by making their betrayal public. That's accountability, not cruelty. Her validation meant more than I expected. I'd been second-guessing my decision to expose them at the wedding, wondering if I'd been too harsh, too dramatic. But Dr. Blackwood helped me see that I'd been protecting myself the only way available in that moment. I'd been taking control of a situation where I had none. I'd been refusing to let them determine the narrative. Vanessa tried to reach out 2 weeks after the wedding. She sent a long email explaining that she was sorry, that she'd made terrible choices, that she hoped someday I could forgive her. She mentioned that she and Ethan had tried to make things work after the wedding exposure, but it hadn't lasted. They'd both realized their relationship was built on deception and thrill, rather than actual compatibility. She was planning to raise the baby alone, and her parents were supporting her through the pregnancy. The email ended with a request to meet and talk things through. I deleted it without responding. There was nothing she could say that would make any difference. Our friendship had died the moment she decided my fiancé was worth more to her than 23 years of history. I had no interest in hearing her excuses or granting her absolution. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the relationship isn't worth the effort to rebuild. About a month after the canceled wedding, I hired a private investigator named Gregory Ashford. No, wait, that was the CEO name from my previous story. Let me use a different name. I hired a private investigator named Russell Chambers who specialized in infidelity cases. I'd been wondering exactly how long the affair had actually been going on, whether January was really the start or if they'd been lying about that too. Russell was a former police detective who'd been doing private investigation for 11 years. He was thorough and discreet, and he found things I hadn't expected. The affair hadn't started at New Year's Eve. It had been going on for at least 18 months, possibly longer. Russell found hotel receipts from 2 years ago, matching dates when Ethan claimed to be at work conferences, and Vanessa claimed to be visiting her grandmother in another state. He found text message records showing communication patterns that predated the New Year's Eve party by more than a year. They'd been seeing each other almost as long as Ethan and I had been serious, which meant the entire relationship I'd thought we had was built on lies. Russell compiled everything into a detailed report with documentation, receipts, screenshots, and timeline analysis. The betrayal was worse than I'd known. More extensive, more calculated, longer term. They hadn't made a mistake at a party and then struggled with the aftermath. They'd been conducting a years-long affair while both maintaining other relationships and social appearances. The pregnancy wasn't an accident that forced a confession. It was the culmination of a long-term affair that Vanessa had finally decided to weaponize. I used Russell's findings to file a civil lawsuit against both Ethan and Vanessa for fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My lawyer, Kathleen Frost, was a family law attorney with 22 years of experience in complex relationship litigation. She reviewed Russell's report and my documentation of wedding expenses, therapy costs, and other damages. "This is solid," she told me. "Intentional infliction of emotional distress requires proving their actions were so extreme and outrageous that they went beyond the bounds of decency society tolerates. An 18-month affair while engaged, involving your best friend, culminating in a pregnancy and wedding day revelation? That meets the standard. The lawsuit wasn't really about money. It was about accountability, about forcing them to face legal consequences for their actions. The suit claimed $150,000 in damages, covering wedding expenses, therapy costs, emotional distress, and reputational harm. Ethan's lawyer tried to get it dismissed, arguing that bad relationship behavior wasn't grounds for civil litigation. But Kathleen argued successfully that the calculated deception, the timing of the revelation, and the extreme nature of the betrayal went beyond ordinary relationship misconduct. The judge agreed to let the case proceed. The case took 8 months to wind through the legal system. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my life. I'd taken a leave of absence from my marketing job immediately after the wedding, unable to face colleagues who knew what had happened. But after 2 months, I returned to work, throwing myself into projects with an intensity that worried my manager. I was trying to outrun the pain, to fill every moment with productivity so I didn't have time to feel. It worked for a while. Then one night, 3 months after the canceled wedding, I was alone in my apartment when the shock finally wore off completely, and the full weight of what had happened crashed over me. I spent that night sobbing, grieving not just for the relationship and friendship I'd lost, but for my own naivety, for the trust I'd had that was gone forever, for the person I'd been before that day, the Claire who believed in loyalty and love and happily ever after. That version of me had died at the altar when I explained why there would be no wedding. The woman who remained was harder, more cynical, less willing to believe in people's essential goodness. I grieved for her too, for the innocence I couldn't get back. Dr. Blackwood helped me understand that grief over betrayal trauma isn't linear. It comes in waves, sometimes when you least expect it. A song that reminds you of good times, a photo in your phone that you forgot to delete, the sight of a pregnant woman on the street. All of it could trigger fresh pain, fresh anger, fresh disbelief that people you loved could hurt you so deliberately. But she also helped me see that feeling those emotions was part of healing, that trying to suppress or outrun them would only delay the inevitable processing. So I let myself feel everything. The rage at being deceived, the humiliation of having 200 people watch my public revelation, the grief over lost relationships and lost future, the fear that I'd never trust anyone again. I felt it all, and slowly, very slowly, it began to lose its power over me. The lawsuit settled 6 weeks before it was scheduled for trial. Ethan and Vanessa agreed to pay $85,000 combined, split between them based on their financial resources. Ethan paid the larger share. They also had to sign statements acknowledging their actions and the harm they caused. Kathleen negotiated a clause that allowed me to share those statements publicly if I chose to, meaning they couldn't later claim I was lying about what they'd done. I donated most of the settlement money to organizations that supported people dealing with relationship trauma and betrayal. Keeping it felt like letting them define my future financially. Giving it away felt like taking back power. The remainder covered my legal fees and therapy costs. Vanessa had her baby 4 months after the settlement, a girl she named Aurora. I saw the birth announcement on social media, posted by Vanessa's mother since Vanessa had deleted all her accounts after the wedding scandal. Looking at the photo of a newborn who was half Ethan's DNA felt surreal. That baby was evidence of betrayal, but she was also innocent. Someday she'd learn the circumstances of her conception and birth, learn that her existence had destroyed relationships and caused profound pain. I hoped Vanessa would find a way to raise her daughter without that burden weighing on her. 1 year after the canceled wedding, I was invited to speak at a conference about betrayal trauma and recovery. The organizer had read about my case and thought my experience and my decision to publicly expose the betrayal could offer valuable perspective. I almost declined. Talking publicly about the worst experience of my life seemed masochistic, but Dr. Blackwood encouraged me to consider it. Speaking your truth to an audience who wants to hear it can be empowering. It transforms you from victim to advocate. I accepted the invitation. Standing on that stage, telling my story to 200 strangers who'd chosen to attend a session on betrayal and recovery felt completely different from standing at the altar telling my story to 200 wedding guests. The conference audience listened with empathy and respect. They asked thoughtful questions about how I'd found the strength to expose Ethan and Vanessa publicly, whether I regretted that decision, how I'd rebuilt my trust in people afterward. I told them the truth, that exposing them had been both empowering and painful, that I didn't regret it, but I also didn't recommend public exposure as a universal solution. That rebuilding trust had required conscious effort and therapy and time, that I was still working on it, still discovering what healthy relationships looked like without the foundation of betrayal. After my presentation, multiple attendees approached to share their own experiences. People who'd been betrayed by partners, family members, friends, people who'd suffered in silence or exposed the betrayal in various ways, people at different stages of recovery. Hearing their stories, realizing I wasn't alone in experiencing this particular form of trauma, helped me feel less isolated in my pain. I started a blog about recovery from relationship betrayal, sharing my experience and what I'd learned through therapy. It wasn't a huge platform, just a few hundred regular readers, but it became a community of people supporting each other through similar experiences. People shared their stories in the comments, offered advice, challenged each other to grow and heal rather than staying stuck in anger. The blog gave me purpose beyond just surviving my own betrayal. It let me transform that pain into something useful for others. 2 years after the canceled wedding, I ran into Ethan at a mutual friend's birthday party. I debated whether to attend, knowing he might be there, but I decided not to let him determine my social life anymore. We ended up near the same conversation group, and it was awkward but not devastating. He'd aged noticeably, looked tired and stressed. He asked politely how I was doing, and I answered politely that I was well. We didn't discuss the affair or the lawsuit or anything substantial, just surface pleasantries. When the conversation shifted, he moved to a different group and we didn't interact again that night. But that encounter showed me I'd healed more than I realized. Seeing him didn't destroy me. It didn't trigger rage or grief. It was just uncomfortable, the way encountering any unpleasant acquaintance might be. I never saw Vanessa again. She'd moved to a different city after the baby was born, wanting to start fresh where people didn't know about the scandal. Her parents still lived in our hometown, and occasionally I'd hear updates through mutual connections. Vanessa was working in accounting, raising Aurora as a single mother, dating occasionally but nothing serious. Her life had continued, reshaped by her choices but not ended by them. I didn't wish her ill. I also didn't wish her well. She simply existed in a space outside my emotional investment. 3 years after the canceled wedding, I met someone new. Noah was cautious and patient, willing to earn trust slowly rather than expecting it automatically. When I told him about my past, about the affair and the pregnancy and the wedding day revelation, he listened without judgment. "I understand why that would make trusting difficult," he said. "I'm not asking you to trust me immediately. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove I'm trustworthy over time. Watch what I do, not what I say. If my actions match my words consistently, maybe eventually you'll be able to trust me." That approach, giving me control over the timeline and respecting my boundaries, helped me open up in ways I wouldn't have thought possible. Noah and I dated for 2 years before getting engaged. This time, there was no elaborate wedding planned. We got married at a courthouse with just immediate family present, then had a casual reception at a restaurant with close friends. Simple, intimate, honest. Everything my first almost wedding hadn't been. Standing at that courthouse, promising to love and honor Noah, I thought about Claire from 3 years earlier, standing at an altar in a wedding dress, explaining to 200 people why she wouldn't be getting married, that Claire had been destroyed by betrayal. This Claire, the one marrying Noah in a simple blue dress with no pretense or performance, had been built from the ruins of that destruction. Sometimes I still thought about that day. The moment Vanessa said she was pregnant with Ethan's baby. The decision to expose them publicly. The look on their faces when I explained everything to the assembled guests. The strange reception where people ate wedding food while discussing the scandal. The year of therapy and legal proceedings and slow, painful healing. All of it had shaped who I'd become. I wasn't the same person who'd trusted naively and loved without reservation. I was harder, more guarded, quicker to question motives. But I was also stronger, more resilient, more willing to advocate for myself and others. The betrayal had taken things from me I could never get back, but it had also given me things I wouldn't have found any other way. Understanding, perspective, the knowledge that I could survive the unsurvivable and build something new from the wreckage. Ethan and Vanessa had tried to destroy me with their betrayal. They'd wounded me deeply, shattered my trust, and humiliated me publicly. But I'd taken that destruction and transformed it into growth, into advocacy, into a life I'd built consciously rather than falling into by default. That wedding day, when I chose to expose them rather than suffer in silence, I'd taken back power in the only way available. And in doing so, I discovered that the truth, while painful, was also liberating. They'd counted on my silence to protect them from consequences. My voice had proven them wrong. The woman who stood at that altar and canceled her wedding by revealing her fiancé's affair had been terrified and heartbroken and furious. The woman who married Noah 3 years later was healed enough to try again, changed enough to choose differently, strong enough to protect herself while still being vulnerable. Both versions of me mattered. Both had shaped who I'd become. And if I could go back and warn the Claire who was about to walk down the aisle, about to have her life exploded by Vanessa's confession, I'd tell her what I knew now, that surviving betrayal, while painful, was possible. That exposing the truth, while terrifying, was powerful. That losing everything sometimes meant gaining the freedom to build something better. They tried to break me. I broke their plan instead. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.